All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. It just depends on what time of the day you are watching this video. Really excited to be able to share with you some great insights from two seasoned professionals who have experienced difficult conversations in the past. And we're looking forward to really sharing a lot of knowledge with you today, and also to give you some insights that will help you on your journey. Okay, my audio may go out for just a moment. I'm going to bring Tracy on to our live. So it'll be just a moment. Okay.
Hi, how
All
are you doing?
right.
Good
Good
afternoon. It's been a rough
afternoon.
one,
I'm
but I'm
good.
glad
How
I'm
are
here.
you? Hey, me and you both.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
I
I
know
really
how
do.
you feel. Hey, I'm so glad that you are here. I'm really excited to be able to share just some knowledge with our listeners who are
Absolutely.
watching about managing difficult conversations. As I mentioned at the very beginning, Tracy has a wealth of knowledge. She has some really amazing posts on how to rephrase conversations that you have. And so she's got some expertise in this area also. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So Tracy, what are some things, some tips, or what would you like to share with our audience today about managing difficult
I would say the
conversations?
number one thing to keep in mind is it's so easy to procrastinate and not want to have that conversation because it can be quite uncomfortable. But the conversation does need to be held. So this tip one is to actually hold the conversation. Now, before you hold that conversation, I recommend, because there's some foundation to this, that as a leader, I feel leaders should know going into, and which actually makes the conversations less difficult to manage. For one, know exactly who you're talking to. So, as leaders, we have to stop having that blanket approach to any and everyone because every person is unique. Therefore, our approach needs to be unique and tailored to that particular person who we're speaking with. So they always say in sports, know your opponent, know your team members, know who you're actually managing, because if you don't, then you don't know how to approach them, you don't know what motivates them, and most importantly, you don't know what demotivates them. So I would say the very first thing is definitely to have the conversations, but managing difficult conversations actually start before you actually need to have that conversation. It starts long before that. And that comes in just leading and knowing your people, knowing what drives them, knowing what motivates them, knowing what triggers them, and just having regular conversations and providing regular feedback to your team. So that way it doesn't all snowball and it becomes a crisis when things really hit the wall and that conversation is no longer one that can be held or manageable. It's now one that you want to run from versus one you want to have. So
Hmm.
that was
That is some really awesome information. So you mentioned a really good point about being able to have those conversations, and really it actually takes place a lot earlier than what you think it may. So do you have any other insights that you would like to share as it relates to maybe preparing for that feedback, that constant feedback, so that those difficult
right.
conversations
And
may not
again, it
be as
comes from
difficult?
providing that regular feedback versus just saving it for the big meeting. Or some leaders don't provide feedback until the performance review, and even then it's just simply a formality. It's not really productive. It really doesn't, it's not instrumental, which it should be, as far as helping your teammates, colleagues, and whomever you're providing that feedback to actually grow. And when leaders only provide that feedback during performance review time, I'm sorry, the teammates don't take it seriously either. So our employees don't take it seriously either because they know it's just, oh, it's that time of the year again, go through and tell them all the things I've done. And, maybe I'll get a raise, maybe I won't get a raise. But other than that, there's not going to be any typically much follow up. And I'm not saying all leaders are guilty of this, but certainly a lot of them are. And I've definitely had I can directly relate to that as well. So even the high achievers need to be need that feedback. Now their feedback requirements may be different, but nevertheless, they still do need support. It's about finding out who you're actually leading, first of all, in order for you to lead. And then once you find out exactly who you're leading, that way it just makes those conversations, any conversation, much more manageable. It just, a person feels unique and actually as a person, and valued when you approach your employees more holistically and uniquely as they are, because none of us are actually the same, nor do we work the same. And I can tell you, just working with the number of people that I work with, and as long as I have been working in my profession, that very few people actually work like me. Now that doesn't mean I work better, or that I'm any better. We just work differently, and that's okay. It's just a matter of not necessarily changing how that person works, but just making sure that it works for the entire team if you're working on a team.
Excellent. Really great insight. And I appreciate you sharing that, because you're right. You really do have to know who it is you're speaking with when you're having that difficult conversation. I know one of the tips that I use when I'm having a difficult conversation
Absolutely.
is really to plan ahead. Like, before you have that conversation, what exactly is it that needs to be said or doesn't need to be said? And oftentimes what I'll do is I will just, if I know I'm having a difficult conversation, or someone's planning on or having a difficult conversation with me, maybe they have something personal going on, I like to start it with an open-ended question to really gauge a sense as to where is this person's head right now. So I may say, well, what were your thoughts about this situation? And sometimes you can use that information to just restructure your message depending on how they respond. If they respond in a way that is, oh, well, I really enjoyed how this happened, or what, I really like this learning opportunity, then great. But if they say, this was the worst day ever, I didn't like it, then I have to figure out in my mind, how exactly is it do I want to manage this difficult conversation? So I usually try to get a gauge from the person first, just to see how she responds. What are some of your
I
thoughts about
definitely
that?
agree with you. And to me, leadership in general should be strategic and it should be intentional, right? So if you're leading with intent, then of course, naturally, that's something you should be thinking about prior to even having the conversation. It's just important that when you ask those open-ended questions, that you're actually asking them because you genuinely want to know where that person's head is. Because I can tell you personally, I've asked open-ended questions, and not all the time it's because I want to know where your head is. It's because I just want to kind of point out to you where your head shouldn't be. So, and that's not the way we want this type of conversation to go.
True.
So you just want to make sure, if you're asking that open-ended question, and just make sure that you're listening, because that's the actively listening, and not just listening to have your response that you've already strategically planned in your head, ready to just throw out there, because then it's no longer communicating when only one side is talking, the other one isn't listening, or vice versa. That's not actually communication. And so it would be a waste of time. And we already know, as leaders or just employees in general, we already have too many meetings, and not enough time to actually do what we're supposed to do. So the last thing we need is to have another unproductive or unsuccessful meeting. So you definitely want to understand from that person's perspective exactly how they feel about a situation and why they feel that way, and not go into it with any type of personal judgment. And it's important to understand this also, is that a lot of times people will say, okay, well, that's not right that you feel that way. And it's important to understand that people's feelings aren't opinions. They don't need your approval. They don't need your validation. They don't need your understanding. When someone says they're feeling a certain type of way, that is how they're feeling, whether you agree with it or not. It's an opinion. So we just, as leaders, you have to be able to put aside your personal emotions and actually lead. And that's why empathy is so important, and humility when leading, because you need to be able to put yourself in that person's shoes and take yourself out, which as leaders, that's how we're supposed to lead, and really what defines a leader anyway. You're looking to elevate those around you, those you lead, not necessarily yourself, because if you elevate them, you automatically elevate not only you, but your entire organization.
I think that's you. It's recording the live now, but I'm telling you that statement you said just needs to be played over and over and over again because it's so true. I mean, we really want to be able to be leaders, and you're right. You have to lead with humility and understanding, but be able to lead at the end of the day. So I'm curious to know. I know you've had some really. She has the best communication turnarounds that I've seen on Instagram. So, is there anything, let's say someone's having a difficult conversation, and everyone that's joined, first, appreciate you all for being here and spending a few moments
Absolutely.
of your day with us today. If you have any questions, or perhaps you've had a difficult conversation that has came up, maybe you were the deliverer or the receiver of it. If you have some questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them for you. But I'm just curious to know, when you're thinking about maybe the language, when you're having a difficult conversation, do you have any tips that you want to share outside of some of the awesome things
I
that
would
are on
just
your
say,
plate?
like you mentioned earlier, just to, especially if you know it's going to be a difficult conversation, definitely don't have that conversation when emotions are high. And try to at least understand what you think the issue is or what the issue may be. So definitely take a look at things before having, that conversation, and just looking at, just thinking back on, what's the actual motivation, or what's really the issue? Because sometimes um, there's one issue, but then it sounds like a whole lot of issues. But if you get to the root of the problem, then that's where you really want to solve the problem. Otherwise, you're just going to be just touching things here and there, and that just is draining, not only for the leader, but for the employee and for the team overall, because time is then spent trying to fix an issue that could very well be a non-issue. And again, it comes down to communication. So definitely in having that open communication where your team feels comfortable, and this is important, comfortable coming to you and opening up to you to have that honest dialogue. Otherwise, whether it's in that difficult meeting or conversation, if they don't feel like they can trust you or to support them, then they won't, even in that conversation, be honest with you. They'll just say whatever and just go on with their lives or their workday, as do the leader. But the problem is still not resolved, and the issues still come up, if not sooner rather than later. But they will resurface because you actually haven't solved anything. Because you do need to get to the root of the problem and not putting a band-aid on what you feel the issue is. Especially, and I know as leaders we don't always have time. But as a leader, this is what we're responsible and should be doing. And that investment, that time investment, will actually save you time, headache, and then allow your team to be much more successful and be passionate about achieving the goals without you having to hopefully have more of those difficult conversations.
Really great insights, and I really appreciate you sharing that just about time. So when you have, and I'm sure you have some insight on this too. So when you've had some of those really difficult conversations with employees or with other individuals, what do you do when you find that the conversation is not really going anywhere? Like you just keep going around in circles and circles, and it's becoming even more unproductive as the conversation goes. What are some tips that you would want to share to just manage that? What would you do? And then
It's
I'll add
important
some
that,
also.
again, you try not to make it a personal conversation or allow your personal emotions to get involved. And a lot of people, there's been a huge emphasis on emotional intelligence here lately, and it is true. But with emotional intelligence, you want to be mindful of others' feelings and what you're saying and your responses. But at the same time, emotional intelligence does not mean that you include your emotions into that conversations, because I mean, I can't speak for
Mm-hmm.
everyone. I'm more of a logical thinker. So I actually have to work harder than some, as far as making sure I include and be mindful of other people's emotions when I'm leading. So that's important, and just being aware of knowing who you are as a leader and who you are as a person, which again goes back to my initial tips, just knowing, most importantly, who you are, but also who you're leading, and not approaching those conversations that way. First of all, who are you
Mm-hmm.
talking to? Depending on who you're talking to, that's going to allow you to say, okay, well, I know this person can sometimes be a bit more aggressive, or she's a bit more emotional, or he, is a lot more combative, things like that. So those are things to consider prior to having that conversation, especially if it's a tested conversation. Now, once the conversation is being held, if that person starts to get a bit testy, or just the mood in the room has gone from lukewarm to super hot, then as a leader, it's time for you to actually say, okay, well, we're not really getting anywhere right now. And it's okay to say that. We're not really getting anywhere right now. Let's just go ahead and table this conversation. But, while we table it, I just want you to think about, some of the things you said, some of the things I said, and just let it process. And then we can revisit the conversation at a later time. And when I say a later time, that doesn't mean their next performance review. It doesn't mean when you're sitting in front of them, giving them the improvement plan. It means to actually circle back with them and keep your word, because they rely on you and your word just as much as anyone else, and as much as you rely on theirs. So it's important that that trust and that support goes both ways.
Wow, that's really, really, very, very insightful, because oftentimes people get in situations like that where they just don't know what to do or what to say when it's a unproductive conversation and you're trying to just navigate your way through it. And I agree with you 100%. Knowing yourself is so important. You have to know what it is that you can handle and what it is that you can't handle. And a lot of times, when those situations start to go out of the way and just keep going on and on and on,
Absolutely.
It's hard if you don't really know yourself as to, okay, this is the time I need to be here. Because what can happen is you have a difficult conversation, and that difficult conversation is lasting an hour and a half,
right?
Something ridiculous, because you're just letting this person just control the conversation. And so one of the tips that I like to do, and you kind of alluded to it also, is really just throw the conversation back and say, okay, well, I'm hearing that this is one of the main concerns that you have. It would probably be helpful for us to maybe take some time to think about it and revisit it at another time, just to end the conversation that way, so that you have a way to wrap basically the conversation up. There may be other things that you can do depending on the type of conversation. Like, as you mentioned, if it's lukewarm and it goes to super hot. If it's a super hot conversation, then you need to make sure you're just aware of what supports that you
Absolutely.
need in case things go south. Where are the exits? Is there someone else around that needs to be aware that you're having a conversation, so that if you need to step away very quickly, then you have some support. And I think a lot of times people don't really think about that. They have these conversations and they know they're going to be really, really, really contentious. Could be. You may not be in that situation. I personally have been in situations like that. Tracy, I can tell you probably have been in situations like that too. And it's really important to know really your surroundings and what you have, what surrounds you to support you, and then also just the timing of it too. I found that having difficult conversations, sometimes at the end of the day, if you know it's going to be a really contentious conversation potentially, I did this one time before and I learned from my mistake. I would never done that again, because you don't have anyone around. It's just you and the individual talking, and that's it. And I'm telling you, that is the worst time of the day to do it, because everyone's gone. You don't have any additional support. So what happens?
No, that's truly key, because especially if you know it's going to be a hot topic or a difficult situation, I would definitely also just make sure you reach out to HR and get HR involved, especially if you already know that it's going to be. Because typically I wouldn't recommend going into a conversation that way. And unfortunately, sometimes those are the nature of those conversations, but I would make sure that you protect not only yourself but also the organization, by making sure that HR is aware, and make sure that it's not the situation is not approached personally, but objectively. I think that's very important, to just go in without any judgment, and definitely to be strategic about it. But I can't even emphasize enough how important it is to know yourself. If you don't know yourself, I don't know how you can lead. I don't know how you defined or identified what type of a leader or what type of leadership style actually works for you, unless you're just going along with what you've learned or what someone else has taught you, which may get you by. But if to be the best leader you want to be and that you can be, and so that you enjoy doing it, I think it's important to find out exactly who you are, what triggers you, what are you passionate about, what motivates you, and then also get to know your team. Because I can tell you what motivates me may not motivate another person or a colleague of mine. What drives me won't motivate them. I don't have a lot of colleagues that love reading contracts or can sit and work on an Excel spreadsheet for 5 hours. And I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. I don't need the social interaction that a lot of people need, and I'm not knocking that. It's about knowing what drives, what triggers a person, because even if it's not within their particular role, and this is where a lot of leaders, just miss the ball with this, because they will again lead according to how they were taught, how they walked into it, versus actually learning to lead and how to lead, and not according to someone else, but according to your leadership style, what you're passionate about, your morals. And hopefully they are aligned with the company's values and goals and mission. But at the end of the day, if you don't know what motivates that person, what drives that person, it's going to be difficult to get the most production out of them, and just in general, a happy employee. So when you understand, that doesn't mean that you have to go out to happy hour with them and be their best friend unless you want to. It just
Right.
means, but there will be a whole different level
Right.
of respect when you know exactly who you're talking to,
Mm-hmm.
who you're leading, or have some type of an idea of who you are talking to and leading. And that alone, the conversation starts off on a whole different step, because you're going in and this person is respecting you for taking the time to actually approach the conversation with them and not with everyone. And when I say that, I mean by not grouping them with everyone and actually taking the time to identify, okay, well, like for example, Tracy, she's not that emotional. She can be quite combative if I say something wrong, or things like that. So, or just stick to the facts. There will be some, for instance, for me, just stick to the facts. For other people, they may need that cushion, that fluff. For
Right.
me, I'm straight to the point. Facts, facts, facts. You can leave all the other stuff out, but everyone's not like that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, just knowing who your people are, what triggers them. If someone shouts at the top of the roof, that something needs to be done. If I don't agree with it, no matter how hard or loud you yell, it's not going to move me. And so, if you want a person to move, if
Right.
you want a results or better results, find out what it is that motivates them, what moves them, and that's going to actually reduce a lot of the issues that we experience daily in the workforce. It's just that, or in the workplace, it's just that
Mm-hmm.
we just don't take the time to do that. It's an investment. And the fact that we're employees come in and get paid every day, and for the most part, a lot of them don't know what they're doing, not
Right.
because they lack the capability, but there's the lack of direction, the lack of understanding what their role entails, how they support the team, or how they're supposed to support the team, and vice versa, how the team supports them. So it's very important. And roles and responsibilities leads to a lot of workplace conflict between team members. And that problem is actually because of a problem that the leaders have actually caused, and they don't necessarily realize how big of an issue it is. But
Yes.
it's so important for
Mm-hmm.
everyone to understand what their role is on the team. And that doesn't mean that no one else can do that task or that role, but on a team, everyone has their primary responsibilities. And that's where communication also comes in. If for some reason, a person can't get
Right.
to this, that, or the other, then they can always reach out to you and communicate. And that's why communication is important. But if a person doesn't know, okay, I didn't know I was supposed to do that from the start. I mean, I've worked for uh, very large companies where I've actually, the first few days on the job, marked up roles and responsibilities between two positions because they were pretty much identical. So handing those roles and responsibilities out to a person really didn't do anything but confuse them even more. At least it did for me. So
Right.
I had so many questions that I took a red pen to it and gave it to my manager. And I'm not suggesting everyone do this, but this is what I did because I like to know what I'm doing. So just think about those who aren't as direct, maybe, or courageous to do something like that, or they're just going to do whatever is put in front of them. And there's, again, nothing wrong with that, other than the fact that people still are going on with their day confused about what it is they were supposed to be doing or how to do it, which means overall that's going to affect your results as a team as well as an organization. So.
That's so true. Such great insights, especially from your experiences, handling situations like that. There are so many great pieces of insight that we shared during our live, and I would like to see if anybody has any questions. I know I'm going to go back through and make sure I didn't miss anybody. Once again, I really appreciate everyone for joining us today. And if you weren't able to join, we will have a replay and share that with you. So good evening, BLM Coaching. Hello. Thank you so much for saying good evening. Does anyone have any questions? Any questions at all as it relates to managing difficult conversations? And while we're waiting for maybe a question or two, Tracy, do you want to share maybe one closing thought for us about some of your experiences and just another tip for them to take away
I would
today?
say that definitely there's nothing wrong with having firm conversations and being professional. And I actually call it when I need to have a difficult conversation, I call it actually being professionally firm. Is how I so
I like that.
those who work with me know exactly what professionally firm means when Tracy's approaching a situation or a topic. And that just means that, feelings left at the door. It's not about feelings. It's just facts, what we need to do. Now I'm not suggesting every conversation is approached that way. Again, know exactly who you're talking to. And it also what that topic is and what drives that person, because you don't want to have a conversation with someone and they're looking for support or really help, and then you get in there and you, based on your conversation, your approach to them, you actually demotivate them even more. So we don't want that to happen, but it is important to have those conversations. They're much needed. Do not put them off only for just to make sure that you're in the correct mind state and emotional state in order to have those conversations, but have those conversations. Even the small ones that you think that don't matter, that employee, even if they don't bring it to your attention, just sit back and think about, okay, if I were in their shoes, would I be confused? Would I feel not supported? Would I feel undervalued? So again, empathy is huge. So putting yourself in their shoes, because at one point we were sitting exactly where they are. Some of us still do. Because a lot of people think, okay, well, a leader is someone's in their office, blah, blah, blah. No, they're leaders too. And, we're all leading. And, if employees are treated as such and looked at that way, you will very rarely have to have a difficult conversation.
That is so true. Such very powerful insights from your experience. And I would add also just to plan and really try to do what you can to establish your presence, your executive presence ahead of time, because oftentimes you will gain that respect from your team members by the way that you are leading. And if you're leading by example, they will respect you and what you have to say and understand that this is just a matter of making sure that we're all on the same page and we understand what it is that needs to take place. And then having some kind of action item after the conversation, because a lot of times you'll have those difficult conversations and you're just wondering like, what happened? I don't know what we're talking about. But really having something in place to say, okay, this is what we're going to do moving forward. If you have any questions, let me support you or something along those lines. So I just really appreciate your time, Tracy. I know you're such a busy woman. You've got many things that you have to manage and do, along with having a really awesome Instagram page. So I just want to appreciate everyone for joining, and also Tracy for you taking time out of your schedule to talk about a great conversation. And be sure to follow us. Tracy's really got some great information about language. I'm telling you, it's the best
Oh,
I've seen on
thank you.
Instagram. So follow her at Cubicle Chatter. I'm at Excite Excellence if you want to get some help with developing that executive presence and confidence to be that leader that you're wanting to be. And I hope you all have a fantastic day. And Tracy,
Thank you
thank you
so
so much
much
for your time.
again.
I
And
really
thank you
appreciate
all
it.
so much for joining and taking the time to listen to us and go over some tips on how to discuss managing difficult conversations. Just remember, have the conversation.
Absolutely. All right. Well, y'all
Thank
have a
you.
fantastic day. Tracy,
Take
thank you so
care.
much for your time. I
Bye-bye.
appreciate you. Bye.